Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin with Jurassic Magic, and in this video today, I wanted to discuss my favorite commanders from Final Fantasy, and I couldn't just do a top 10 list, I had to do a top 25 list. With the sheer amount of legendary creatures, it was quite literally impossible for me to narrow it down to 10, and that's probably a benefit for you because you get to see more commanders and my opinions about them. But in return, I would also like to hear your opinions about them too. What is your favorite commanders from the entire set of Final Fantasy? Leave a comment down below, and let's jump right into it. So before diving into the top 25 commanders of the entire set, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a rundown of how I will rank these commanders. It is one of three things. First, I focus on the uniqueness of the commander. I also focus on the power level of the commander, along with the playability. And overall, it is just my opinion after all. My opinion may differ from your opinion. However, this was a really hard list to make. I went back and forth, reorganizing the list over and over again. One point I had like one commander at rank 24, then I put it all the way down to like number 9. You'll find out later, but I shouldn't waste any more time talking about the list. I want to get right into it and talk about number 25. And for this one, I had to give it to Gilgamesh, Master at Arms. I think this one is a pretty cool commander. Whenever it enters or attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put any number of equipment cards from among them onto the battlefield, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. When you put one or more equipment cards on the battlefield this way, you may attach one of them to a samurai you control. And I thought this card was alright until I realized you put any number of equipment cards from among them onto the battlefield, so if you reveal like 3 or 4, you get to put them directly on the battlefield, and that's huge. And of course, you could cheat equipment costs with this. Plus, it is a samurai after all. The art looks really cool. There's a lot of things going for this, and that's why I have it at number 25. But now let's take pause and talk about number 24, and this one would go to Y'shtola Rule. This one is the alternate version of Y'shtola in the main set. For 4 and 2 blue, at the beginning of your end step, exile target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. Then if it's the first end step of the turn, there is an additional end step after this end step. So in a weird way, this is double blinking at your end steps because it's giving you an additional one. I feel like that by itself justifies a place in this list because a lot of people love blink. A lot of people love getting that extra value of 2 blink triggers along with getting an additional end step. That could be quite powerful in a lot of different situations. Again, if you have like a Solemn Simulacrum, you're going to get 2 ETBs off of just her. So from 24 to 23, let's talk about Vanilla Cheerful Icy. And this one to me is more of a fun card because I love how it can meld with another card named Fang, Fearless Icy. And I don't know why I'm saying it like icy, like the drink, but it is very neat how it can meld into Ragnarok Divine Deliverance. I love meld cards because it kind of feels like a mini game in a weird way. I don't think the commander is doing anything special. You're going into a graveyard theme, returning permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. I wish this was a partner with Fang, but unfortunately it's not. You have to use this in the command zone and find Fang in your graveyard or in your library. Then of course in your first main phase, you can meld them into Ragnarok Divine Deliverance, which has a whole lot of keywords. I did make a budget version of this in one of my videos. Definitely go check it out because it is a very fun brew, especially for a budget deck. But since this is a long list, I want to move down to 22, and I want to talk about Kimahri, Valiant Guardian. This one for me is a pick that I love mainly for the art. For 2 green and a blue, it has Vigilance, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on Kimahri and tap target creature an opponent controls. Then you may have Kimahri become a copy of that creature, except its name is Kimahri Valiant Guardian, and it has Vigilance and this ability. So again, this art is really cool. It is a cat warrior, but it looks much more than that. Obviously, the big draw to this commander is cloning the best creature on the battlefield and becoming it itself. It's not going to clone one of your own creatures, but it will clone one of your opponent's creatures, and if your opponents are playing big, giant, scary threats, well, you could tap that down, and Kimahri will become a copy of that. I don't know, this one's just really cool. I like the design perspective, that it's just basically a copycat in the command zone, and quite literally a copycat. But now let's shift our focus to another commander that is from the precons, and that's Estinin Valorinu. This one is a pretty cool concept. It's an Orzhov color combination for 4 mana. It's a legendary creature, elf warrior, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. It gains flying until end of turn. It has another ability at the beginning of your second main phase. You draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of opponents who were dealt combat damage by Edstein Queening or a dragon this turn. And what's pretty neat about this is you could go into a dragon theme with this deck, and it is kind of off color because normally dragons are red or green, but of course with a lot of Tarkir Dragonstorm, we got a lot more dragons that are in this color combination. Plus, going into that Spellslinger theme with dragons is a pretty unique take. Also, card draw in the command zone is pretty powerful, so I had to give it to Estenin at this placement. So now that I've talked about number 21, let's now talk about number 20, and that's Absolute Virtue, and this is absolutely insane. I don't know if it's going to be good as a commander, but as far as power level goes, this is extremely powerful. The only one downside is that the fact that it doesn't have protection for itself, but let's be glad that it doesn't have protection because it itself will give you protection from each of your opponents. From what I heard from the Final Fantasy community, this boss was very hard to beat. It took over like 30 hours, correct me if I'm wrong. I only read it somewhere a couple days ago and trying to remember it exactly. Besides that point, this one is pretty simple. It is 8 mana in Orzhov color combination. That is the one big downside. It is hard to cast, but when you cast it, it can't be countered, and it has flying and an 8/8 body and gives you protection, and that does include you can't be dealt damage, enchanted, or targeted by anything controlled by your opponent. So that is honestly a wacky text that could be stapled on a body, and if you give it some sort of protection like hexproof or indestructible, your opponents are going to be in for a long game, just like the game. But let's move along and talk about number 19, and this is the first version of Kefka that we're going to be seeing on this list with Kefka Dancing Mad. This is high CMC, but it is a very chaotic spell. During your turn, Kefka has indestructible, and at the beginning of your end step, exile a card at random from each opponent's graveyard. You may cast any number of spells among cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. Then each player who owns a spell you cast this way loses life equal to its mana value. That is pretty nuts, especially if somebody's playing high CMC spells in their graveyard. You cast them by random. This is just basically showing you the chaotic nature of Kefka. And honestly, clowns, I'm surprised this is not a clown in addition to its other creature types. However, it seems very fun. But again, the high CMC is the only thing that's taking it back. But either way, I know a lot of people love their chaos, and this is no exception. But let's move down the list a little bit further and talk about Yuna at number 18. In this version, Yuna Grand Summoner is pretty unique. It's a mana dork in the command zone, and whenever you cast your creature spells with the mana you spend with Yuna, they enter with additional +1/+1 counter. Not only that, whenever another permanent you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, if it had one or more counters on it, you may put that many number of +1/+1 counters on target creature. You put it on Yuna, or a creature that has a lot of counters, so you could swing in for an alpha strike. I like this because normally when creatures die, and especially if they have 1/1 counters on them, they just kind of fizzle. Yuna makes sure that those counters will be moved onto something else, so that in a way, the memory of that creature that was huge can live on another creature. Plus, in band color combination, I really like this design, and so that's why I have it at this placement. Moving along to 17, Sephiroth Fallen Hero is a very cool concept in a commander for 3 red and a white. Whenever it attacks, you may put a cell counter on target creature until end of turn. Each modified creature you control has base power and toughness 7/5, and you can put it back on the battlefield by sacrificing a modified creature and paying 3 mana. And Sephiroth itself is a 7/5. 7 damage is the right type of damage to do commander damage. But what really makes this commander unique is you can put a lot of 1/1s with really good abilities on the battlefield and put a cell counter on them, making them 7/5s instead of 1/1s. Think of all those creatures that have really good stats, but the only thing holding them back is the fact that they're pretty small. Well, Sephiroth will change that for you, and that's why I think he's deserving to be on this list. But let's move over to number 16 and talk about Ultima Origin of Oblivion. This one is absolutely insane. I would say the one thing holding this back is the fact that it is in colorless, but that's not quite a big downside because it is going to double all your colorless mana, and that's the only thing really lacking in a lot of colorless strategies is mana production. Unless you're playing Eldrazi and playing a lot of Artifact Ramp, you could just double all the mana from your lands, making them essentially into Ancient Tombs or into Mishra's Workshops if you have an Ancient Tomb on the battlefield. This will help you cast a lot of big giant spells for cheaper, and not only that, it acts as a hate bearer, especially against those players that like to play a lot of lands that have good utility like Gaia's Cradle or Field of the Dead. This just turns those off, basically making itself into like a Blood Moon, and this is all based off of attack. It would need haste to get the ability right away, but again, I think it's very cool and a unique design in a commander. But let's look at the next commander with Sin Spira's Punishment. This one is incredibly cool. I love the design of how this looks, and the commander itself is pretty powerful. When it enters or attacks, exile a permanent card from your graveyard at random, then create a tap token that's a copy of that card. If the exiled card is a land card, repeat the process. So in a weird way, this can act as a great landfall commander if you're putting a lot of lands in the deck that you're milling milling into the graveyard. You could just repeat the process as many times as you'd like, and if you have a lot of landfall creatures on the battlefield, you could swing in for huge plays. The one downside to this commander though, it is at random, but that does make it a little bit more fun because you can kind of see the randomness that will ensue when you attack or enter the battlefield with this. But enough about Sin, let's talk about another card with Celeste Rune Knight. This one is at number 14, and this one is a pretty neat commander because it's a combo engine with persist creatures. Also, it itself being a looting effect when it enters the battlefield is pretty powerful. You could use this with some blink shenanigans, and of course buffing up all your creatures whenever one or more creatures you control enter the battlefield. This is doing a lot for you in the deck in that reanimator strategy, so that's why I have it here at number 14. Now we're basically around halfway through the list at number 13, and I feel like this one is going to be a very fun overall commander, and that's Choco, Seeker of Paradise. A lot of people love this type of creature in Final Fantasy from what I hear. It reminds me of a Terra bird of ancient times. Let's read what it does. Whenever one or more birds you control attack, look at that many cards from the top of your library. You may put one of them into your hand and put any number of land cards from among them onto the battlefield tapped and the rest into your graveyard. And it has the landfall ability. Whenever land you control enters, this will get +1/+1 until end of turn. I don't think this one's super powerful. I mean, don't get me wrong. When this gets going, it really gets going if you have a lot of birds on the battlefield. We did get a lot of bird support from Bloombro in Azorius color combination, but adding green is just going to be chef's kiss because you could just add Birds of Paradise with a Seeker of Paradise. So there's going to be a mix of flightless birds and flying birds in this type of deck. That could be pretty useful whenever you're swinging with a huge army of birds, getting all those landfall triggers. So I think overall this one is pretty fun. Not super powerful, but hey, if you like birds, go for it. But I guess in a weird way, now we're truly midway through the list at number 12. Since it's a weird odd number with 25, that kind of meets down the middle at 12.5, and so now we're at 12. Anyways, let's just get back to the list and talk about number 12, and that would be Tifa, Martial Artist. And a lot of people like this one a lot because it focuses on extra combats. You know me, I absolutely love them. It has the melee ability, and whenever one or more creatures you control with power 7 or greater deal combat damage to a player, untap all creatures you control. If it's the first combat phase of your turn, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. This one is incredibly powerful. Again, a lot of people love their extra combats. Getting more use out of them with combat triggers or attack triggers can be pretty useful in this type of deck. I mean, I feel like personally, there's nothing really truly original about this commander. However, power-wise, this is pretty fun. And the next card I want to discuss with you might be a little controversial because a lot of people love this, and that's Sid, Timeless Artificer. And the reason why this is very popular with a lot of different people is the fact that any deck could have any number of cards named Sid, Timeless Artificer. This kind of gets around the singleton rule of commander, and that by itself is okay, sure. I mean, I know a lot of people like doing this. I think it's going to be a big chase card of the set, just like the Nazgul from Lord of the Rings, but it does have a very good ability. Artifact creatures and heroes you control get +1/+1 for each Artificer you control and each Artificer card in your graveyard, and it does have cycling, pay a white and a blue. So kind of the idea, if you were to build around this, is to constantly cycle Sid while having Sid on the battlefield, so all your creatures that are artifacts and heroes get buffed up for each one in your graveyard. I don't necessarily think this is going to be the most impactful commander, but I do believe by popularity a lot of people are going to build around this because a lot of people like breaking the rules of commander and having any number of a specific card in their deck. So I thought I'd like to highlight Sid in this way. But now we are at the top 10, and I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into each of these commanders instead of just brief overviews. I was originally going to make this a top 10 list, however, there were so many commanders that I wanted to talk about that I decided, hey, let's just do 25. The first 15 I'm going to give quick overviews about and discuss their game plan. But now since we're at the top 10 list, I'm going to dive into them a little bit deeper. So let's talk about number 10, and that's going to be Lightning Army of One. I made a deck tech around this commander when Final Fantasy was first getting spoiled, and this one is a powerhouse. It's 3 mana, so it's pretty low in CMC. It has First Strike, Trample, and Lifelink. First Strike is going to be very important with this commander with another ability. Whenever Lightning deals combat damage to a player until your next turn, if a source would deal damage to that player or permanent that player controls, it deals double that damage instead. That is going to be quite powerful, especially if you go into extra combats, if you're trying to spread the damage around, or if you're really just trying to target one person. You can keep amplifying the damage to a specific player on each combat, and with First Strike, you swing in with Lightning. Lightning will deal the First Strike damage, then all the other creatures following that will double their damage, and of course if you throw a Lightning Bolt after the combat damage at that person, it'll deal 6 damage instead of 3 damage. Lightning is a menace. I think it's a very cool design. I love doubling damage along with extra combats, you know me. And the fact that she does have lifelink means that you're going to gain a ton of life, especially when you double damage with her. If you get some double strike or even extra combats, it's seriously such a powerhouse, and that's why I had it at number 10. But let's move along to number 9, and that would be Noctis, Prince of Lucis. And this one for me is a mixed bag. I do understand how powerful it is, but I think people are overrating this one just a little bit. It has lifelink, and you may cast artifact spells from your graveyard by paying 3 life in addition to paying their other costs. If you cast a spell this way, that artifact enters with a finality counter on it. So yeah, playing cards from your graveyard is quite powerful, especially in Esper color combination. However, if you don't really have cards in your graveyard, this is kind of a do-nothing commander at first. But if you build around it a little bit more, of course, you could be casting a lot of spells, but you're going to be losing a lot of life in the process. However, it does have lifelink. You swing in, gain 4 life. But the one downside is the fact you're only casting artifact spells. If this was casting like non-creature spells, then maybe it would be a lot more powerful, but maybe a little bit too powerful. This kind of reminds me of the Master of Keys in a way where it's basically like an Underworld Breach in the command zone, but for artifacts instead of enchantments. Don't get me wrong, I still think this is powerful, and there's probably a lot of combos that you could utilize with this commander. I personally feel like it's a little overrated, but still rated fairly in some situations. But now let's move on to number 8, and this one is going to go to Titus Yuna's Guardian. And this one I like a lot. This design is very cool and unique. For Bant color combination for 3 mana, at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may remove a counter from a target creature you control and put it onto a second target creature you control. And it has the cheer ability. Whenever one or more creatures you control with counters on them deal combat damage to a player, you may draw a card and proliferate. Do this only once each turn. That is pretty powerful. Proliferation with card draw is great. And what's pretty neat with the interaction of moving counters onto a second creature is you could manipulate really any kind of counter, like a hexproof counter, an indestructible counter, trample counter, lifelink counter, you name it. You can proliferate those, and if you have another creature on the battlefield, you can just move one counter to another creature and kind of spread the love a little bit. Again, there's a lot more counters that you could utilize. Those are just some of the ones I wanted to name. So this one is pretty significant and quite powerful, all at 3 mana. It's giving you card draw and proliferation. There's a lot of ways to build around this, and honestly, it's such a unique commander. I know I'm kind of praising this one a little bit more compared to the other ones, but I just think it's pretty neat. Let's move along and talk about number 7, and that would be Cloud X Soldier. And I know this is probably one of the most popular characters in the entire game, and I think this one is deserving at number 7 because it's a really good Voltron commander. For 2 and Naya color combination, it's a legendary creature, human soldier mercenary, and it has haste. When it enters, attach up to 1 target equipment you control to it. So let's just stop right there, giving itself haste to swing in right away, and attaching an equipment that's very powerful to itself right away is going to be very strong. If you have like Cauldron Complete on the battlefield, you could just automatically equip its cost to Cloud and give it a whole lot of keywords. But of course, Cloud has some additional bonuses. Whenever Cloud attacks, draw a card for each equipped creature attacking. Then if Cloud has power 7 or greater, you create 2 treasure tokens. So for 1, this is giving you card draw, and 2, this is going to give you ramp in the form of treasure. This is everything you want in a commander, especially in Voltron. This is a very good Voltron commander. You could use this like in a blink theme if you want to cheat costs of equipments. Instead of using their equip cost, you could just blink this again in the battlefield and attach another equipment that you could utilize better with Cloud. And of course, there's a ton of equipment you could utilize. You only have to get to power 7 or greater, which is pretty easy to do. It's just 3 more power, and especially in a Voltron strategy, you're definitely going to get there by getting more treasure tokens. And honestly, it's fun that you get to go in a go wide strategy too. The more creatures you control that are swinging and attacking, that are equipped, the more you're going to draw more cards. So honestly, Cloud is a fantastic beginner commander and reinvigorating Voltron in a different way too. But now we are at number 6, and this one is going to go to Terra Magical Adept. And this one for me is very strong. For 1 red and a green, when it enters, mill 5 cards, put up to 1 target enchantment card mill this way into your hand, and it has the trance ability. You pay 4 red and a green, tap it, exile Terra, then return it to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control, activate only as a sorcery. Then she will flip into a legendary enchantment creature, Saga Wizard, Esper Terra. For the first 3 lore chapters, you're creating a token that's a copy of target non-legendary enchantment you control. It gains haste. If it's a saga, put up to 3 lore chapters on it, sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step. And with the last lore chapter, you add Wooburg mana twice over, and then return Esper back to the battlefield as the front facing side. And also, Esper does have flying 2 with a 6/6 body. So I like this one because there are some combo shenanigans that you could utilize. With the front side and the back side, it is an infinite mana outlet to food chain specifically. You constantly exile it with food chain and a food chain creature, mill your whole entire library, and put an enchantment from your graveyard to your hand, like a Perforos God of the Forge, and then use that food chain creature and Perforos God of the Forge to burn everybody on the table. Obviously, that's a very spiky way of winning with Terra. Of course, this is going to be a 5-color commander too, which utilizes Enchantress specifically, making token copies of enchantments. And honestly, the best part about this is the fact that if it's sagas that you're copying, you're putting 3 lore chapters on them, them, which will just get their abilities just right away. So I just think this is very cool and unique. I love the design of this card, and I'm pretty biased towards Gruul even though it's a 5-color commander, so that's why it's at this placement. But now we are at the top 5, and I will be honest, a lot of these placements in the top 5 can be switched around because I was switching them around all the time when I was making this list. But I feel personally, number 5 has to go to Y'shtola, Knights Blessed, and a lot of people would put this higher on their own list, but for me personally, it is going to be at number 5. It is quite powerful. It has Vigilance, and at the beginning of each end step, if a player lost 4 or more life this turn, you draw a card. That could be great because it's great card advantage, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, it deals 2 damage to each opponent, and you gain 2 life. So this could act as a great win con in the command zone, all the while giving you card advantage. Plus an Esper color combination. This is fantastic in that non-creature spell type of deck when you're casting a lot of high CMC spells. The only downside to this compared to the rest, and this is the reason why I knocked it down a little bit, is the fact that you have to cast mana value 3 or greater spells in order to get that trigger of dealing 2 damage to each opponent and you gaining 2 life. Also, I feel like this is going to be an instant target commander where a lot of people want to remove it before it deals too much damage on the battlefield. So there is also that going against it. But let's move on over to 4. And this one, I actually had at number 1 initially, but I had to tamper down my expectations because it is monocolor after all. And that's going to be Sephiroth, Fabled Soldier. And don't get me wrong, this creature is extremely powerful. I just think the other cards that are above this are better in some ways. It does read when it enters or attacks, you may sacrifice another creature if you do draw a card. And it's basically a Blood Artist. By whenever another creature dies, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. If this is the 4th time this ability has resolved this turn, you transform him. And he transforms into Sephiroth, One-Winged Angel. And you get an emblem, and that's right, an emblem of a Blood Artist. That is quite crazy. That's always going to stay on the battlefield forever for you. And it has a crazy attack trigger. You may sacrifice any number of other creatures if you do draw that many cards. And it has a 5/5 body with flying on the backside. So again, this is extremely strong. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of infinite combos because Blood Artists usually will help you win the game with infinite death triggers. However, Sephiroth is limited because it's just mono black. I mean, don't get me wrong, he made it all the way up to number 4, and at one point he was number 1 on the list. But like I mentioned previously, there are a lot better commanders that are higher than him that I do believe are deserving. And so speaking of which, let's go to number 3. And this one I kind of forgot existed because it was previewed so early on, and that's Selch, Unsundered. And this one is really powerful. I don't think people realize how powerful this commander is. It has Vigilance, and when it enters or attacks, you draw a card, then discard a card. So it has that looting ability. And not only that, at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 14 or more cards in your graveyard, you may transform Selch, and it will turn into Hades, Sorcerer of Eld. And this has Vigilance, and during your turn, you may play cards from your graveyard. If a card or token would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So it's basically a Yawgmoth Swill on the backside, and a pretty sizable body with Vigilance and 6/6. This is really powerful. I don't think people realize how powerful this card is. This is going to be great in Reanimator, and really any type of strategy where you want a big, massive graveyard. There's a lot of combos that you could utilize with Selch. So there's power, there's a pretty unique design, and overall, it has a reserved list card stapled to the backside. So what's not to like about this card? But now we're down to the wire at number 2, and this one is going to be Kefa, Court Mage, and this was originally also another card that was going to be number 1. Again, I switched places for a lot of these different cards, but I decided to keep this one at number 2. This is quite strong and another combo enabler in the command zone, and honestly probably going to be a very salt-inducing card the more people play against it. As it enters or attacks trigger, which is really weird because the previous 3 commanders had an enters or attacks trigger. Each player discards a card, then you may draw a card for each card type among cards discarded this way. Previously I mentioned it was up to 4 cards, but I forgot that some other cards may have more card types, so you could potentially draw more than 4 cards in a single enters or attack trigger, which can be pretty powerful. And if you do manage to flip it into the backside, it is absolutely backbreaking. Whenever opponent loses life during your turn, you may draw that many cards. So this combos with like Niv Mizzet or Psychosis Crawler, because whenever opponent loses life, you get to draw a card, and because you drew a card, you can make an opponent lose life, kind of go back and forth, drawing your whole entire deck, all in the process of making people lose a ton of life. But really, even the front side is a really good build around. You could go into that Reanimator strategy, discarding cards in your own graveyard and drawing into Reanimator spells that you could cast to reanimate that specific creature to the battlefield. And if it's like a Hullbreaker Horde power, and if you have some mana rocks that are positive, you could go back and forth, casting those mana positive rocks, getting infinite mana, and then playing Kefka over and over again, drawing your whole entire deck, and getting infinite mana that way, and infinite card draw essentially. So again, this could have been number 1 and easily would have been, but if it weren't for my own personal bias, it could have been there. So what is the number 1 commander of all of Final Fantasy? And this one is a fan favorite from what I've heard, and that's Vivy Orniter. And this one I absolutely love. It's very simple in its design, and it's also quite cheap as a commander, only costing 1 blue and a red, and it has a very good activated ability by paying 0. Add X mana of any combination of blue and or red, where X is Vivy Orniter's power, activate only during your turn and only once each turn, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Vivy Orniter, and it deals 1 damage to each opponent, and it has a 0/3 body, and there's a lot to unpack with this commander, but I think the one reason why I like this card so much, besides the art because he looks absolutely adorable, is the fact that this commander is very versatile. And you're probably thinking to yourself, wait, how is it versatile? It's going into the Spellslinger theme. Well, you could build it that way, but there's a lot of other ways you could build around it. You could go into the Voltron theme because you want to boost its power, and a lot of Voltron cards like equipment or auras are typically non-creature spells. Also, something like Curiosity is going to give you an insane amount of card draw with Vivy Orniter attaching it. Also, this could really scale with the table. If you want to go less power, you could easily do so, but if you want to go all the way up to CDH, you may possibly even do that. This can be an infinite damage outlet in the command zone by casting infinite non-creature spells and blasting everybody on the table. And honestly, being a mana dork, adding a big ritual amount of mana can provide you some serious big splashy spells even in the early game. The way I built this commander was building a Dragonstorm type of approach. I've always wanted to build a Dragonstorm commander deck because if you storm off with a lot of little spells and then cast a Dragonstorm, you could just put a bunch of dragons on the battlefield and potentially win. And I know it's a little jankier, however, I just think it's a fun way to brew around Vivy. And again, it's just a testament to show that this is a very versatile commander. Even though on the surface it looks like a Spellslinger theme, you could really branch it out and do a lot of different type of decks with it. And so that's why it is deserving for me at number 1. However, that is going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on the top 25 commanders of the entire set of Final Fantasy. Of course, there's a ton of other commanders, and it was kind of overwhelming to make this list, I'm not going to lie. There are definitely some other commanders that I missed on this list. Let me know down below in the comments which is your favorite commander that's either not on the list or even on the list. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. Also, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stopping by.